3,500-year-old screaming mummy, the mummified body of an ancient Egyptian woman.
2,300-year-old mummy.
Archaeologists have discovered what may be the oldest and most complete mummy ever discovered in Egypt.
Mummies, for the longest time, have been the most terrifying things found during archaeological expeditions, with their dry bones and hallowed eyes. And sometimes they are found in the most twisted, terrifying position, as if frozen in great terror.
Just in time for Halloween, scientists at the Field Museum are peeling back the wrappings of several Egyptian mummies without disrupting their eternal slumber.
This can be a scary sight for anyone. But do you know that mummies aren't only from Egypt? They are also from various places around the world, with countless terrifying stories and histories that would send even the bravest person away. Like the discovery of a mummy bound with rope, or the German sailor who was found mummified after weeks of passing. Join us as we take you through this amazing discovery. The Screaming Woman Mummy.
The so-called screaming mummy.
And this mummy is unique because it has his mouth wide open. It looks like it's really screaming.
Mummification can be a very scary process, and what's been uncovered during this archaeological expedition will leave you speechless. For the longest time, archaeologists have discovered a number of ancient mummies in Egypt and Americans with facial expressions that resemble a scream, a chilling sight that's eerily similar to the Norwegian painter Edvard Munch's The Scream, but one in particular has haunted scientists for decades. Between 1935 and 1936, a team of archaeologists embarked on an expedition to Deir el-Bahari, an ancient site near Luxor, Egypt. It was here that they stumbled upon a remarkable discovery: the mummy of a woman whose facial expression seemed frozen in time. Her mouth was wide open, as if she had been caught in the middle of an anguished scream. The terror on her face was so vivid that all who saw it were left frightened. This haunting find earned her the nickname the Screaming Woman, a name that has stuck with her to this day. The Screaming Woman mummy left a lasting impression on archaeologists when she was first discovered. Her painful appearance was like nothing they had ever seen before. While other mummies had been found in a screaming position, they didn't convey the same sense of terror as this one. So who was the Screaming Woman, and how did she end up in this state? To find out, let's take a closer look at where she was found. She was buried in the tomb of a high-ranking official named Senmut, who was an important person in ancient Egypt. He was the architect and overseer of royal works, and rumors even say he was the lover of the powerful Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled from 1479 to 1458 BC. The mummy was inside a wooden coffin in a burial chamber beneath Senmut's family tomb. But despite being found, her identity is still a mystery. However, the jewel that was on her body gives us a clue about her life. She had gold and silver rings with scarab beetles made of gemstone jasper, a symbol of resurrection. These treasures suggest she was a wealthy and important person. In fact, experts think she was probably a close relative of Senmut's family, since she was buried with them in their eternal resting place. But that was only the start of learning more about her. With the help of modern technology, researchers in Egypt were able to zero down on her life on Earth. They found that she was around 48 years old when she passed away and had lived with mild arthritis of the spine and missing teeth. Despite being over 3,500 years old, her body was incredibly well preserved. This was thanks to the expensive ingredients used to embalm her, like juniper oil and frankincense resin, during ancient Egypt's Golden Age. The ancient Egyptians believed that preserving the body was crucial to secure a worthy existence in the afterlife. Normally, they would remove the internal organs, except for the heart, during mummification.
What the embalmers would do is remove all the internal organs, the lungs, the liver, the stomach, and the intestines.
But strangely, this wasn't done for the Screaming Woman. You see, in ancient Egypt, the embalmers took care of the dead body, so it would look beautiful for the afterlife. That's why they were keen to close the mouth of the dead by tying the jaw to the head to prevent the normal post-mortem jaw drop. But the Screaming Woman was different. Her mouth was left open, suggesting that something unusual might have happened during her mummification process. However, a closer look revealed that her embalmers had actually done a great job, using high-quality ingredients and providing her with expensive funeral attire, including 2 valuable rings made of gold and silver and a long-haired wig made from date palm fibers. It was due to this fact that speculation arose concerning her widely opened mouth. Archaeologists believed that the woman died screaming from agony or pain, and that the muscles of the face contracted to preserve this appearance at the time of death. This can happen when someone dies after going through something really traumatic. It's called cadaveric spasm, and it's not fully understood. Basically, cadaveric spasm occurs after severe physical or emotional suffering, with the contracted muscles becoming rigid immediately following death. Sadly, the true history or circumstances of her death may never be known, or why her face is frozen in a scream. But now let's look at a very different story. Instead of fear, this next pair of mummies shows us love. Hassanlu Lover's Mummy. There's nothing more that screams romance than finding 2 mummies in an eternal kiss of devotion. But what if that kiss was frozen in time and was forever trapped in a moment of desperation and love?
The image of these 2 skeletons together, you cannot help but be filled with wonder and filled with awe.
The Hassanlu lovers are a pair of human remains that were found at the Tepe Hassanlu archaeological site, located in Nakhade in the West Azerbaijan province of Iran in 1973. But it was the position they were discovered in that really took the archaeologist by surprise. The lovers were discovered by a team of archaeologists from the University of Pennsylvania, led by Robert Dyson. The 2 human skeletons were found together in a bin during excavations, seemingly embracing at the time of death. It was as if they had died in each other's arms, clinging to each other for dear life. The only thing that was found with them was a stone slab under the head of a skeleton. But what's even more chilling is that they were only the 2 of the 246 skeletons found at the site. Now, the real question is, how did the lovers end up in that bin? Unfortunately, nobody knows, but archaeologists speculated that the lovers might have died from asphyxiation. And what's even more strange is that their skeletons didn't show any sign of injury from around the time of their death. This mystery gets even deeper when you look at the history and the events of the city they were found in. Around 800 BCE, the city of Hassanlu, located in northwestern Iran, was destroyed and attacked by an unknown enemy. Many of the inhabitants were killed, and their bodies were left lying where they fell. This tragic event marked the end of an era for Hassanlu, an ancient Near Eastern site located in the Qadar River Valley, on the southern shore of Lake Urmia in northwest Iran. For thousands of years, people had lived and thrived in this city since around 6000 BCE. But in a flash, everything was gone, destroyed by fire. The devastating fire left behind a trail of destruction which would remain hidden for many centuries. It wasn't until excavations began that the true extent of the damage was revealed. Archaeologists uncovered the burnt remains of massive mud brick walls, thick layers of ash, skeletons, vessels, and many other artifacts. The destruction was so intense that it effectively froze the city in time, preserving buildings, artifacts, and even skeletal remains. Many of the artifacts, including the skeletons, were exhibited at the Penn Museum from 1974 until the mid-1980s. Although the skeletons didn't show any signs of injury, one of them had a mysterious hole in the skull. Archaeologists were quick to point out that this wasn't due to an injury, but rather the result of a careless worker's pickaxe. When the skeletons were first found, they were facing and embracing each other. The skeleton on the left was lying on their left side, reaching with their right hand towards the skeleton on the right. There is no definitive explanation as to how the 2 skeletons ended up in the bin, only assumptions. One assumption is that they must have crawled into this bin, which was probably covered at the time, and escaped detection. The tragic story of the lovers of Hassanlu raises many questions about the past, but it's not the only ancient mystery that continues to fascinate the world. In fact, here's another haunting discovery that's just as interesting. Children of Lulaylako. High in the Andes Mountains, 3 frozen mummies were discovered in 1999, and these mummies have really changed the perspective of the world on ancient child sacrifices.
It was really one of the greatest discoveries of the decade. The state of conservation of these mummies was amazing. They were like little kids sleeping.
The discovery was made on March 16, 1999, during an expedition led by archaeologist Johann Reinhard and his team. They were exploring the summit of Lulailaco, a stratovolcano located on the border of Argentina and Chile. It was here that they stumbled upon the remains of 3 Inca child mummies. These mummies are now famously known as the children of Lulailaco, or the mummies of Lulailaco. In the 1500s, the Inca Empire, which was a powerful and large empire in South America, practiced a ritual where they would sacrifice to the gods. This ritual was called capacocha. As part of this ritual, the children were given cocoa and alcohol to make them sleepy, and then they were placed in a tiny room about 5 feet underground. Sadly, they were left there to die.
Capacocha was the most important ceremony for Inca culture. It was an honor for their families. If one of the kids of the family was chosen, they must laugh, they must be happy, because these children were going to be gods.
But it may surprise you that these children's bodies were preserved for centuries, and today, archaeologists consider them among the best preserved mummies in the world. This has helped archaeologists learn more about the Inca Empire's practices, including their tradition of human sacrifices. But why would the Incas resort to such a brutal practice? It turns out that the human sacrifices were often used as a desperate attempt to please the gods. During times of famine, the Incas believed that offering humans as sacrifices could help them avoid disaster. And these sacrifices were done under the direct approval of the Inca emperor. Children from all over the Inca Empire were selected, but only those that were physically perfect were chosen. Actually, these children came from noble families and were the sons and daughters of local rulers. Once they are chosen, these children are taken on a long journey, traveling hundreds or thousands of miles to Cusco, the capital city. There, they go through important purification rituals. Then they are finally sent to high mountaintops throughout the empire to be sacrificed. According to traditional Inca belief, children who are sacrificed do not truly die. Instead, they watch over the land from their mountaintop perches alongside their ancestors. As much as this sounds gruesome today, it was seen as a great honor during the Inca Empire for children to die as a sacrifice. When the archaeologist found the 3 mummified children, several gold, shell, and silver statues, textiles, and pottery were also found. But what really caught people's attention was how these kids were positioned when they were found. Take the oldest mummy, a 13-year-old girl known as La Doncella, or the Maiden of Lulailaco. She was found in a sitting position, which was quite rare for any mummy. When examined, doctors found that she had a bacterial infection in her lungs. But despite her untimely death, she was well dressed. She wore a beautiful dress, her hair was intricately braided, and she had a stunning feather-adorned headdress. The second mummy, La Niña del Rayo, was only about 6 years old when her life was tragically cut short. Sadly, her small body suffered further damage after she passed away. A lightning strike hit her, damaging her face, one of her ears, and part of her shoulder. Despite this, her body was carefully positioned, with her head held high and facing southwest. She was dressed in a beautiful traditional light brown dress called an aksu, and her head and body were wrapped in a warm, thick woolen blanket. What's also interesting is that her skull appears to have been intentionally shaped to be longer than usual. The little boy, El Niño, was only 4 or 5 years old when he was sacrificed. His body was wrapped up tightly, which caused some of his ribs and pelvis to become dislocated. It's clear that he went through a lot of stress before he died, as there was vomit and blood on his clothes. Sadly, his hair was also infested with lice. What's really striking is that he was tied up, unlike the other 2 children. He was found curled up in a ball, wearing a grey tunic, a shiny silver bracelet, and leather shoes. He was also wrapped in a cozy red and brown blanket. But what's really tragic is that because of the way he was tied up, it's likely that he suffocated to death. Now, unlike the children of Lulailaco, whose origins were clear, that can't be said about this next mummy, whose nationality was a debate. The beauty of Croran. Nobody expects to be talked about thousands of years after they're gone, but this woman's nationality in ancient China has caused a fascinating argument. The Beauty of Kroran, also known as the Lulan Beauty, is the well-preserved body of an ancient woman from China's Xinjiang region who lived 4,000 years old during the Bronze Age. There are many fascinating things that make this mummy remarkable, but what stands out most is the fact that she was well preserved. Due to her excellent state of conservation, she is one of the most famous Tarim mummies. As a matter of fact, when Chinese archaeologists found her in the 1980s, alongside several mummies, they were amazed by how well preserved she was. This is because the Lulan Beauty was buried near a salt lake in the desert, where the arid and dry conditions preserved even the finer details of her face, such as her eyelashes. The mummy was wrapped in a wool cloth, cowhide leather and linen. Her feet were even clad in leather shoes, which was an important detail considering she's over 4,000 years old. Archaeologists also found some interesting items near bodies, like objects made out of clay and grain. This helped provide valuable clues concerning her life and culture. Unlike Egyptian mummies, which were preserved on purpose, the Lulan Beauty and other Tarim mummies were preserved unintentionally. So who was this mysterious woman? Estimates suggest that she was in her 40s when she passed away. Her physical appearance also helped. She stood at around 5 feet 1 inch to 5 feet 2 inches tall, which was a slightly above average height for women at that time. A closer inspection of her belongings shows that her shoes and clothing had been worn out and fixed repeatedly. Her hair was infested with lice. She had inhaled a great amount of sand, dust, and charcoal, and she may have died of lung problems. But finding her ancestry was quite difficult. At first glance, archaeologists noticed that the body was not of Chinese appearance, leading to the popular belief that the woman was of Uyghur origin. Due to this, several decades of argument arose between the Chinese government and archaeologists. The Chinese government was afraid of aiding the Uyghur nationalists. Despite the challenges, a major breakthrough came in 1993 when Victor Mayer and Italian geneticist Paolo Francalacci were able to test some tissue samples. Although the Chinese government confiscated the samples, Mayer claims a Chinese scientist later slipped into their hands as they were leaving. This daring move finally allowed archaeologists to know more about her origin. Through this, they concluded that the Lulan Beauty's ancestry came from Europe. But the Lulan Beauty is not the only ancient secret that's been hidden for centuries, because in Peru, a mysterious mummy was found. The rope-bound mummy. After years of exploring ancient tombs, archaeologists thought they'd seen it all, but nothing could have prepared them for the shocking discovery of a mummy tied up with ropes. That discovery was made in 2021, when a team of archaeologists stumbled upon a well-preserved mummy in an underground tomb in Cajamarquilla, Peru.
Archaeologists have hailed a latest discovery in Peru as possibly the most exciting find of the decade.
The mummy was found with its hands covering its face, fully bound in ropes. This haunting sight left experts with more questions than answers. Archaeologists from the National University of San Marcos made the discovery at a site located 16 miles inland from Lima, Peru's capital city. At that time, Cajamarquilla was a bustling city which was located on the right bank of the Rimac River. This city was a place of trade and commerce, attracting people from all over Peru, from the coastal regions to the mountainous areas. Researchers estimate that over 10,000 people called Cajamarquilla home. The mummy, which was estimated to be between 800 and 1,012 years old, was found in an underground tomb that had a 7-step staircase leading down to it. As archaeologists carefully examined the body, they found the male to be between 18 and 22 years old when he died. His body was carefully wrapped in a textile, and he was buried with some interesting items. Beside him lay the remains of a dog and an Andean guinea pig, as well as corn and other vegetables. These burial items suggest that he may have been a person of importance, perhaps even the son of a wealthy merchant. The mummy's pose is undeniably scary. Bound by ropes and curled up in the fetal position, it's an image that grabs people's attention and sends shivers down their spine. At first sight, it's natural to wonder if this person met a grim fate or was subjected to some kind of ancient torture. However, researchers have a different perspective on this. According to them, this pose is not a sign of trauma or suffering, but rather a traditional southern Peruvian funeral custom. The custom of the ancient Peruvians may seem shocking, but it's nothing compared to the awful experience of visiting a mummy museum where real mummies are kept on display. Mummy Museum. Nowhere else in the world will you find a country that celebrates the dead like Mexico does. Every fall, Mexico honors its ancestors with the iconic Dia de Muertos, or Day of the Dead, where streets are filled with scary yet fascinating calaveras, skeletons, and bones. But there's one place that takes this celebration to a whole new level. A place where the line between life and death is blurred. And that's the Museum of the Mummies in Guanajuato, where the dead are immortalized in a way that will leave you breathless.
Inside Mexico's Museum of the Mummies, where we learn about its history and significance. We do want to warn our viewers that some might find the images you're about to see disturbing.
In this museum, you will find the preserved bodies of several mummies in different unnatural and awkward positions. But how did the mummies end up here? Well, the history of the museum dates to the early 1830s, when a cholera outbreak spread across the region and led to the deaths of many people. To contain the disease, the bodies were placed in above-ground crypts. However, decades later, a harsh new law changed everything. In 1870, a burial tax was introduced, forcing families to pay to keep their loved ones' bodies in the crypts. Those who couldn't afford it were left with a heartbreaking decision. Their loved ones' bodies were removed and stored in a building, where the dry, hot climate of Guanajuato had a surprising effect. Many of the bodies were naturally mummified and became the fascinating exhibits that are on display. As time passed, people from all over the world started visiting the tombs where the mummies were kept. This sparked an idea, and in 1969, the old building where the mummies were stored was transformed into a museum called El Museo de las Momias, or the Mummy Museum. Today, the museum is one of the top tourist spots in the city, with dozens of mummies on display for visitors to see. While some people might find the mummy exhibits disturbing or disrespectful, the people of Guanajuato see it differently. For them, it's an important part of Mexican culture, which views death as a natural part of life, rather than something to be feared. In fact, the museum is considered a vital piece of the city's history, and locals are proud to share it with visitors from around the world. So why is this museum such a big deal? Well, for starters, it's home to a collection of mummies that are really one of a kind. Many of them are posed in strange, awkward positions that can be a bit unsettling, but also fascinating, like a mummy with a slaked jaw and an infant with leathery skin. As a matter of fact, many of the mummies are standing with their arms folded. These strange positions have caused people to visit these mummies for over a century. At first, visitors would pay a small fee to check them out in an underground crypt. But in 1969, the mummies were moved to the Museo de las Momias, where they're now displayed under dramatic spotlights. These mummies, which date back to the 19th and 20th centuries, are a huge source of pride for the city of Guanajuato. In fact, they're the city's second biggest moneymaker, after property taxes. As one local put it, the mummies of Guanajuato bring the biggest economic income to the municipality after property tax. Their importance is hard to overstate. But the mummies are also kind of controversial. Some visitors from other cultures are confused about why Guanajuato, which is one of Mexico's most beautiful cities, would display human remains in such a way. Some experts even think that the bodies are stored poorly and have the speaking of labels. Take a look at this next interesting mummy that archaeologists dug out with something quite remarkable found in its mouth. The mummies with the golden tongue. In ancient times, people had a great belief that gold had special powers that could help them in the afterlife. This belief has been confirmed by a recent discovery in northern Egypt. Archaeologists found 2,000-year-old mummies with golden tongues placed inside their mouths. These mummies were discovered in tombs at Alexandria's Taposiris Magna temple, which was popular during the Greek and Roman eras. The mummies themselves were not well preserved, but the golden tongues were still intact. Apart from this, the Egyptians also decorated the mummies' coffins with golden images of Osiris. For example, one of the mummies had a special covering called cartonnage, which was made from layers of plaster, linen, and glue. And on this cartonnage, archaeologists found gilded decorations that pictured Osiris. The lead archaeologist, Kathleen Martinez, who was in charge of this expedition, took a closer look at the decorations and found some fascinating details. On one mummy's head, the decorations showed a crown, horns, and a cobra snake. And on the chest, there was a picture of a necklace with a falcon's head hanging from it. So what's the significance of the falcon symbol on the mummy's necklace? Well, it represents the god Horus, a major deity in ancient Egyptian mythology. But here's the thing, this isn't the only mysterious discovery that's been made. 2 more skeletons with golden tongues were discovered at the ancient town of Oxyrhynchus. And that's got everyone wondering why we are finding so many mummies with golden tongues. It turns out that during the Roman period, the Egyptians believed that gold was the flesh of the gods. They thought that by placing golden tongues inside the mouths of mummies, the deceased would be able to speak in the afterlife. And these mummies were believed to have the power to communicate with Osiris, the god of the underworld. Moving on from mummies found in excavation sites, let's take a turn to the sea. What began as a sea voyage ended up as a tomb for an unsuspecting sailor who never made it back to shore. Mummy on a yacht. On February 26, 2016, something totally unexpected happened in the Philippine Sea. A German sailor was found dead on his yacht. What was really shocking wasn't just how he was found, but that his body had turned into a mummy just weeks after he died on the boat. The elderly sailor was discovered by local fishermen who sighted the misshaped ship from afar. But what actually happened to him? Well, investigators think he might have died from a heart attack or stroke, and the warm, salty ocean air basically preserved his body. So who was this sailor? Police were able to identify him from photos, letters, and documents scattered around the yacht's cabin. His name was Manfred Fritz Bajorat, a 59-year-old seasoned sailor. The yacht itself was in rough shape, with a broken mast and water filling part of the vessel. But what could have caused Bajorat's body to become mummified? One possibility is that the weather conditions were the cause of this. The hot sun, dry air, and salty seawater would have quickly dried out his body from the outside, turning his skin into a tough, leathery skin that kept bacteria and insects from getting in. But here's the thing, even though his skin was protected, bacteria inside his body might still have been breaking him down bit by bit from the inside out. It's a pretty intense process. And according to experts, the combination of sea air, heat, and salt is basically a perfect recipe for mummification. In fact, mummification can happen surprisingly fast, between 2 and 3 weeks. During this time, the fingers and other extremities, like the nose and face, dry out quickly. In just a month or 2, they could be completely gone. As the body continues to dry out, the skin starts to change. It becomes yellow, hard, and leathery, which is usually within a week or so after death. This process keeps going until the body is fully mummified, which typically takes several weeks. And in the case of this sailor, that's exactly what happened. Many believed that his isolation from the world was due to the loss of his beloved wife in 2010, due to the letter and the picture he had for her. Love is really a beautiful thing, and sometimes it can be tragic, like these next mummies who were found in a fatal love position. Lovers of Valdaro. Everyone loves a good love story, but the discovery of a Neolithic tomb in Italy is a love that surpasses time. Archaeologists came upon a remarkable find in 2007 that left the world fascinated. Inside the tomb, they found a pair of 6,000-year-old skeletons, buried together in a very romantic position, not just holding themselves, but embracing themselves for thousands of years. Now known as a lover's embrace, photos of the skeleton couple quickly circulated throughout the media, and the timing couldn't have been more perfect because the discovery was made just before Valentine's Day. This made things feel much more special. For a lot of people, the way the bodies were positioned immediately brought to mind the classic tale of Romeo and Juliet. As archaeologists took a closer look at the Valdaro lovers, they made some really interesting discoveries. One of the first things they found out was that the couple had lived and died around 6,000 years ago, during a time known as the Neolithic period. This was a really significant time in human history. It was the transition from a nomadic, hunter-gatherer lifestyle to one that was more settled and agricultural. Another interesting fact was that both the young man and woman were around 20 years old when they passed away. There were no signs of violence or trauma, and it's likely that their bodies were carefully placed in this position after they died. However, when researchers first started examining the skeletons, they had a different theory. They thought that the man, whose body was on the left, might have been killed, and then the woman was sacrificed to join him in the afterlife. This idea seemed possible based on some clues they found. For instance, the male skeleton had an arrowhead lodged in his neck, which suggested a violent death. The female skeleton also had some suspicious objects near her body, including a long stone blade by her thigh and 2 flint knives under her pelvis. These discoveries initially supported the sacrifice theory, but as researchers dug deeper, they started to question this idea. Although we can't know for sure who these 2 people were or what their story was, the image of them holding each other for thousands of years is really captivating. Thanks for coming. See you in our next video.